Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of boards, recorder of videos, and a tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to the DM Roundtable for December 2022. This is a chance for patrons and I to get together and discuss topics in tabletop RPGs, and by sharing our ideas, thoughts, and experiences, we could all become better DMs or GMs. The DM Roundtable discussions are open to all patrons at every level of patreon.com/roguewatson. You don't have to be an active participant. You can jump in here and lurk to your heart's content, and we are glad to have you. This month's topic, as determined by the Patreon poll and the tiebreaker, which is me, is metagaming. Players are typically far more savvy than their characters, or in some cases have advanced knowledge of monsters, threats, or even entire adventures. How do we deal with the curse of metagaming at our table, and does it also infect us as the game master? Joining me for this month's DM Roundtable, we have Brandon.
Hello.
Stan.
Good evening.
Lucas.
Hello.
And a special guest, Paul Robin, Gwynethane Laundry himself, Mr. Chris.
Hello, sir.
Hello. I know you've done some metagaming, hence I wanted to bring you on to. No.
This is all an excuse for Eric to have an intervention to call me out.
Shots fired.
But we just recently had an event that's kind of one of the reasons this was on the topic board too, with the Flame Skulls. Minor spoiler for our Rime of the Frost main campaign, but at some point a Flame Skull shows up. And Chris brought up a good point where this was actually after, I think, during Frostside chat, where it's like, oh shit, like, I know as a player, Flame Skulls have the ability to, like, regenerate and come back and attack you and do all this bad news, but, I was like, yeah, but players don't typically know that.
Right.
So in that case, it was another circumstance because we had an NPC that probably would have that knowledge. But this also leads to build on that topic, which I think is tricky, is that players could often have the argument, well, how common of knowledge is this particular thing in this world of magical threats and spells firing off? And so it gets kind of tricky where it's like, well, I know as the player I can metagame, but then is this just common knowledge that players have? Or maybe because of my background I can do something, or can I roll a check? So I think it really kind of depends on the situation. It gets a little bit more nebulous with that. Brandon, let's start with you on, have you run into any problems with metagaming at your table, either from your end or from the player's end?
Generally, no. The moment metagaming starts to come up, most of the time it starts with, wouldn't this, and I'll just say you're not there if they're not like connected to the scenario, because that's probably the biggest problem I've got is somebody who wants to participate in everybody else's things. And so I'll just quickly, politely say, you're not in the room or you're not part of the conversation, and then move on.
So even table talk, you shut that down pretty quick.
Just quickly. Yeah. Pretty quickly. And it's one of those things where I don't mind some table talk. I don't want there to be one person giving everybody else ideas and taking away their ability to make the decision or investigate or whatever the case may be. I've got another guy who knows the monster manual in and out. It is, you could name a creature, he could give you the AC, the hit points, and whether, just some of the features of the monster. And
it's like me and Pokemon.
He the way he's handled it is he plays generally low intelligence creatures, so that he doesn't have to worry about participating in role playing. But it still creeps up. You can tell in decisions that are made of like, oh, I'm not going to use lightning in this situation, or I'm not going to use fireball in this situation. I'm okay with that because they're not verbalizing it necessarily. They're just picking other things. I'm not going to stop somebody from that.
Right. Stan, do you have examples of metagaming at your table that you've had to deal with?
I have a couple players that really are invested in the game. Like, we were talking about possibly playing, and they went out and bought a player's handbook 2 months before the game ever started. And it was like, I like the enthusiasm. Then they go, well, can I look up these creatures and stuff? No. And so, but very responsive to that. But that player's also turned into my metagaming police officer at the table, so I don't have to do it. Recent game was I built a set piece, and so I've got I play in person and I've got everything on the table, and they go, well, we want to go in here because this goes over here, and they go, you can't see that.
The player does?
They busted another player saying, you don't know that. You see these two doors, which one are you going in? And I'm sitting back going, I love this.
Oh, wow.
This is amazing.
That's got like young sibling energy, I think, too. Is like the one who's policing like the other siblings. Like, no, I can't have it, then you can't have it.
No comment. But I also, like Brandon said, I have a veteran player who's a DM in his own right, and he intentionally nerfs himself. He plays a peace cleric with the only offensive spell he has is Word of Radiance, so he can only hit somebody 5 feet away from him. And so he has no range. And there's one situation he goes like, I'm not getting involved in this conversation because I know too much. And he purposely kept his character out of it because he did not want to poison the well for the rest of the table.
Wow, that's impressive. You both have good anti-systems going on here. Lucas, tell me about situations you've had to deal with metagaming or that your players have dealt with it.
I have a good example because in my current group, it's a mix of some veteran players and half are more novice. One is particularly, this is his first campaign. And an example I have, actually, a very good one, was it was a dungeon, an actual dungeon, and the head jailer, the boss, was a vampire. And to a certain extent, there was common knowledge, like, oh, we know how vampires work. And I said, yeah, of course, because just like it's like in our world, we know about vampire stuff.
Yeah, that's a good example about it's like a big like cultural mythology. Like how well of information do people know versus like rumors or legends. Keep going, but
but here's the really nice thing is that one of the more experienced players, see, when they killed the vampire, the vampire, they turn into like smoke or mist or something and they just regenerate and go away. He stopped himself and saying, oh wait, when this happens, oh never mind. Because, see, the thing is, it's about the attitude. Like, if they have the mentality of being, like, cheesing it and underhanded, then what are you going to do? But if they're, like, trying to be honest, I'm not going to be the thought police and say, you subconsciously knew and you acted subconsciously. Look, they're trying,
Yeah.
As long as they're acting in good faith. But also, that is a fun thing because you can, this is especially in a world where these are like real threats.
Yeah.
About watch out for owlbears or watch out for vampires do this, know?
I think it'd be fun if players took that mitigate to where like if vampires like they came up with something like, oh, vampires are weak to fresh linen or something, like come up with like just random ass shit that doesn't make any sense. Yeah. Vampires can't imbibe alcohol, give us a drink or something, like to where you could come up with other things, like because that's kind of how these things, just rumors and legends and things would spread. I think it would be a really fun way of balancing that. Not that I've never seen anybody actually do that. Chris, I think I might be able to know all your metagaming stuff, which is not very much, but I feel like at our table, we might metagame a little bit, and it's hard to get away from that.
Listen, I know that a mountain lion hides in the bushes before it pounces on me. Have I ever seen a mountain lion in the real world, in the wild? No. I know a brown bear.
If you had told me you had, though, I would believe you, because you go camping in some fucking...
that's true.
You've got some like bear stories, so I'm just
That's
surprised.
why I know this information. It's because all my examples are like dangers for when you're camping. I know that bears can climb trees. Have I ever seen a bear climb a tree? No, I've never seen that myself, but I know that information.
Yeah.
So to some degree, does a player know this is pretty broad for me. Like if
especially an adventurer would have some
adventurer,
like would you have like at least Boy Scout knowledge at that point?
Can I add to this right now, actually?
Yeah.
Not to interrupt you, but to add to that. Here's the thing, though. People say, when you see a grizzly bear, play dead. No, when you see a grizzly bear act big. It's unreliable common knowledge.
You do hear
depends on the bear, but yeah, that's what I was saying.
No, don't fight back.
That's what I was saying about the vampire thing too. Yeah, like you could definitely have that be messed up and have people not quite know the information.
I've literally heard both with grizzly bears. I've literally heard advice on both ends. The like, oh, you got to fight back or you're gonna die. Like, no, you don't fight back. You play dead.
I was gonna say, correct me if I'm wrong. Grizzlies, you play dead.
Yes.
Black bears, you can be big and scary.
Yeah, black bears aren't even going to mess with you. They're more scared of you than
and then polar bears, you're fucked.
You're fucked.
Yeah. That's literally what I've heard.
Yeah. That is.
You're just already done.
There's some very nice rhyme about that I can't remember now.
But it ends with the polar bear killing you, I think, is the end of that.
Exactly. If a polar bear wants you dead, you are dead.
Yeah.
But outside of that, though, outside of like me being pretty broad with like, oh, you're an adventurer, so you would know what dragons do. You know, like you would know what a manticore is. You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Outside of that, I think the only time you get into trouble, and I feel like this is kind of just.
Would you know what a manticore is? A dragon, I think, yes.
Dragon,
yeah.
That's where the gray area is.
That is a gray area.
What's the scale?
That's what I never understand, and I'm not
children's textbooks.
Exactly.
In the 9 realms, you know what is.
Especially anybody who's new to like any of that particular fantasy world, you wouldn't necessarily.
Well, I'm not even talking about the players. I'm talking about like people in that universe. I'm talking about like the Sword Coast folks. What do they teach in their elementary schools? Are they like, hey, when you're out in the mountains, if you see, a manticore, here's what it can do.
And that's a good point about it's a case by case basis, because you could make an argument where like the player's like, hey, I grew up in the swamps, like maybe I would know about certain kind of swamp creatures, or maybe I would have more knowledge.
I know what bullywugs are. I know what their cultures are like.
Like poison things or traps would have to do that. And then as a DM, I'd be like, you know what, that's actually a pretty good point, but maybe I'd have you roll like a history or a intelligence check or something just to try to confirm maybe any information you would know, which is, we have those house rules for identifying creatures, and I think that served us pretty well, and that kind of helps get us out of the meta knowledge thing. But I've noticed we haven't used that as much as we've been playing more and more D&D, and we the players recognize these same characters, like, oh yeah, there's goblins, there's kobolds, there's we've used the same kinds of creatures many times. Only when a brand new creature comes up to us do people say like, okay, I need to, engage with these house rules. But you never see somebody like the player going like, oh, well, my player has never encountered example.
Exactly. The one that like I feel like a lot of people just end up learning through playing, and they stop asking, or they stop even pretend like they're not metagaming. And this is one that here's where I'm guilty. I've done this with, I think, Rochelle before. Undead and types of damage. Where like you got like a skeleton in front of you, and Rochelle, I think at one point she tried to do like psychic, and we're just like, Rochelle, don't, just don't, like do something to run up and hit it. Like,
there was some kind of resistance where it's like, no, that's not gonna work.
or poison or something. I think it was psychic, but anyway, it's just that the stuff that's like players don't want to just waste their turn. Yeah. So it's real hard when they've got that subconscious, notion back in the back of their head, like. If and some of it's obvious, like fire elemental, fire, whatever.
Right.
But like undead and like zombies and poison, it's like you don't want to accidentally waste your turn. So if you know that from the metagame, it's hard.
Yeah, that's true.
To go like, well, but my main attack is a poison attack, so my character should do this.
Yeah.
But I don't want to.
Yeah, I don't want to have because I know you're gonna tell me like, oh, guess what, that guy's immune to it, and you're like, I knew that, but I just did anyway.
Yeah, so it's hard to get around, like, because people don't want to waste time. Yeah, people don't want to make big mistakes like that. And sometimes not metagaming would call for that. But it's kind of, like you said, it's kind of a case by case thing.
Even as a DM, I might step in like that especially if it's something where you can tell the players like caught up in the moment and maybe not realizing something like that. Whereas it's and maybe the adventurer is very experienced, and maybe they've even fought that creature before, which is kind of an example of how I don't make people like roll history checks for things that happen in the campaign, like to recall story information. Like if you faced this creature before, even in the context of this campaign, but you just don't remember as the player because we haven't fought it in 6 months of real time, then I, as the DM, will interject with which I don't think it's meta knowledge at that point, because again, it happened in the context of the game. It's just knowledge.
I've seen Eric. I've seen you correct people when you describe something and they just miss the description.
Yeah.
You'll say like, oh, as you hit them with the in this campaign, it's like fire against ice guys. You see the fire hit the ice and it seems to absorb it, and somebody's just doesn't catch that. And then I see, you can kind of correct it, like, hold on, before you do that, you remember a couple minutes ago you saw.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's true. I don't remember this big example, but I think that's happened a couple of times.
Fine line, I think.
Go ahead, Steve. Go ahead, Brandon.
Okay. it's a fine line as far as us being adults with responsibilities and jobs. And there's that moment that it's like, I want to have fun. I want to do this. I want you to explore. But at the same time, I want to get on with it because we need to play this game and finish this section out. So that's always tough. I think I've switched to using your house rules when people start to ask questions or start to push those envelopes. I'll say, well, let's roll.
Yeah,
Let's see what you know.
Yeah.
Because my players are responsible enough to take the role for what the role is and use that information. They like to exercise their improvisation skills to be able to test, I guess, whatever the role ended up being.
Yeah.
I think
I definitely encourage that. It's a free roll. Like, it's just free. You're just looking at the thing and trying to ascertain based on your own background and your information. So a lot of times if you say like, oh, I grew up in a swamp, I should know this, I'll be like, okay, we'll roll. I don't know if it's come up like this particular example, but I would probably give somebody advantage on the check to use that house rule, which again, we keep referencing this. It's basically, it depends on what kind of creature it is, what type it is. It depends on the role.
You got like 2 rolls for each creature, right? Like, it'd be like religion.
Most
or
of
arcana.
them, yeah. So if it's undead, it's this. It could be this. If it's a monstrosity, it's this. If it's a dragon, it's this. So you kind of have to, you as a DM need to look up the type and then you just tell them what roll to make. And then it's, which I really like it whenever 5e does this, it depends on the result is how much information you get. So if you do less than 10, you know nothing. You just can't remember whatever you're trying to recall, or you can't deduce enough based on what you've seen of this creature. And then if it's 11 to 14, then you might know like just some basic attacks or something. And then it goes all the way up to, if you roll like a 20 plus, you know everything about its weaknesses, resistances, like you know everything about this creature. You practically wrote the book on it.
Yeah,
I've stolen it for both of my campaigns, and usually I'm the one that reminds the players, "How about you do this roll for me real quick?"
Yeah.
And so I've also been guilty of trying real hard not to metagame as a DM against my players. I find that sometimes difficult.
Yeah, you're like, I know so-and-so's got counterspell. I shouldn't do this spell, but they know.
But does my monster know that?
Yeah, exactly.
So what I'll do is I'll roll even odds in those situations to say this is what the creature or the monster or the NPC is going to do based on the situation.
Like, I shouldn't attack the barbarian because
the other way,
the barbarian's got resistance.
Yeah. I was thinking, or the other way where you specifically do something because you know your players have a way of handling it. That's another DM metagaming.
I'm probably guilty of that too.
Yeah. Kind of going back a little bit, I don't use your formal house rules, but I do like on the fly. Like I have a ranger and a wood elf in my current campaign, and so when it comes to certain creatures, I give them advantage or have them make a check, or sometimes they just flat out know it based off their background. Or I have we're doing a lot of stuff in Waterdeep, and I've got 2 characters that grew up in Waterdeep. So it's like, oh, you know this, or you know that, or this noble house is, these guys are a piece of work to deal with, or, so, you have some of that. Also by region, as we were talking about, if you're mountains and with manticores, magic in the realms is not as common out like Waterdeep. Everything's magic. The street lights are magic. You've got flying carpets going down the street because there's money like crazy. But if you go out into the region between Waterdeep and Neverwinter, you're in little villages, and what you call a cleric is actually just a priest, and he might not even know. He might be the equivalent of a magic initiate. He can cast Cure Light Wounds once a day. That's it. And so when you see someone drop a fireball, it's like, oh my gosh, Elminster's here. And they've never seen anything like that. Same thing with creatures. Everybody might know an orc, or everybody might know a goblin, but a gnoll comes rolling through.
Right. You can get kind of exotic. You can get right. You can.
I don't know
what
what this.
You get, the more you can argue that, like, no, you've never seen this before.
Or like a Behir. They kept hearing rumors in the caves of what the orcs were calling blue lightning death. And they're seeing how. They just leveled a drow patrol, and they're going like, what the crap is this? And they're seeing scorch marks, claw marks, bite marks. What the heck happened to these guys? And the orcs go, blue lightning death, and just shrug and walk off. And when they finally found it, they found out what a Bahir was.
One interesting solution to the metagaming problem as a DM or game master is to not use creatures from the monster manual, not use standard monsters or creatures. Or if you are going to use them, take them and make variants of them, have them wear...
Or reskin them. I reskin them
that's what I mean. Yeah, you could have them different weapons or different kind of armor, or give them a couple of casting spells, which early on in 5e was more necessary. Now, I think there pretty much are official variants of most, like, of the shock troop. You know, there's a bunch of different orcs and drow and dwargar and all that kind of stuff. But
well, one thing I'd like to bring up is that I don't police it for the sake of policing it. Like, if they're in the spirit of it and they're like not cheesing shit and metagaming up for the sake of just trying to win or screw, you know, or take advantage of the situation, like they'll say, "Wait, do I need to heal you? How many hit points do you have left?" And I know, strictly speaking, I know, like, no, observe how wounded they are or whatever. No. They're in the spirit. They're not trying to min-max or any of that stuff. They're not trying to game the system. They're just being sensible. But also, I mean, I could justify it by saying, well, reasonably, in that world, they'd see, oh, this person's bleeding a lot or is heavily wounded, or this person seems a bit...
We just watched him get stabbed at the chest. Yeah, he needs some help.
So, in a technical sense, I think it's not all or nothing.
Yeah.
It's a lot of... There's a gray area, and most importantly, is this metagaming a problem, as opposed to metagaming for the sake of good reasons, actually, like the DM metagaming to make things better.
Yeah.
But also, like, I'm not trying to metagame for my enemies. You can metagame to nerf an encounter, but also, in a way, I do that because, like, the orc in our party, she's just invincible. Her AC is stupid, and also she's a tank. But you know what? The average dumb brutes will say, there's the biggest warrior foe, and not the squishy, pick off the squishies first, you know?
Yeah.
I get a lot of people when I'm playing live, and then I'll play crafting later, and they tell me, not so much this campaign, but I know previous campaigns where I ran certain fights suboptimally. I'm like, you know, a lot of times I'm not playing very intelligent monsters or antagonists.
Right. It's kind of rare to play like a strategist, right?
Yeah, or a full team of strategists that are doing as much as they can. You know, even if you're playing wizards or something, like in the one where I had all the Dazan clones or whatever, they were like mostly insane. Like they're just throwing out spells like crazy. They're not really care about any particular strategy in that case. So a lot of time, like, obviously it's against my best interest to just attack the barbarian with her giant, ridiculous amount of hit points and her resistance. But A, that plays the character's strengths, which I think is always fun for that character. And B, that's kind of what a lot of monsters and creatures would do. And 5e really doesn't have an aggro system, but normally that's what would happen is the tank would draw the aggro from those creatures. Now you can still have some cool stalker, hunter, predator type creatures that would know, hey, I don't want to go for the biggest, angriest thing on here. I want to go for the squishiest, smallest, easiest that I think is to kill, and then you can take advantage of that. But yeah, because as you say, conversely, players metagame. The DM could really just make your life miserable. Yes. They have the advantage. Absolutely. They know everything. They know everything about your characters. Yes. And that happens all the time. When I'm planning encounters, I will look and say, you know, oh, but this person's resistant to this, person was immune to that, so it'd be better if I attack this person. But if you notice, and Chris, you'll notice this, a lot of times I try to use that random token fate thing for my attacks. Sure. I've been doing that a lot in this campaign too. If it's really like, you know, there's no particular target for this enemy to go after, in terms of they're like, you know, an undead just going after the nearest creature or something. But if they have multiple targets, I like, let's just leave it up to a flip of the coin, which I think is the most fair thing I can come up with.
You would take even the perception of DM shenanigans,
favoritism, or trying to particularly like down somebody. Then I can be like, look, let's just and that's probably also a symptom of using a VTT where all of our rolls are public. So I also try to make all of my randomized rolls public. So I'm not just picking targets, which is what I used to do. I'm like, let's just have this nice macro that I can click a button and then that'll determine who the target is.
You were talking about third-party monsters or changing the monsters. I've been using recently some of the packets from the MCDM Flea Mortals stuff, which has been fun because like I said, the player who knows the monster manual in and out, being able to use some of those monsters was just new features, right? Just new things that they can do.
It can be really exciting for that player, and it's because it's hard for that player to decouple, even if they're really good about it. Like you said, they just take themselves out of it. You're like, look, I just can't. Like, I know skeletons, it's better to use my club than my sword. Like, it's really fucking hard for me to get away from that.
But the flea mortals and then the kobold press stuff has been really cool to be able to integrate into the games I've been playing. It doesn't happen all the time, but if I'm generating an encounter to flesh out something else, those have been great resources.
Yeah, I like Nord Games as well, and Eric's probably sick of me saying it. I'm a major fan of their bestiaries for upscaling and downscaling. They downscale epic monsters like a lich, but they can also upscale something like a wight. So if you have a favorite monster, you can find it an up or down version to keep it relevant to your party. And it really messes with your veteran players when you put something that this guy's hanging with us. He looks like a wight, but how's he hanging with a level 9 party?
Did you say Nord Games? N-O-R-D?
Yeah, N-O-R-D. Yep.
I'll take a look at that.
An example I wanted to use, I should have done this at the beginning, which is the metagaming. This is actually from Wikipedia. I looked this up to make sure I learned about meta, because metagaming in general, it means different things for a role-playing game versus, like in a competitive video game or a card game. The meta is like, what's the most strongest broken thing, and then that's the current, meta game, and then the next thing that's the meta game is the thing that counters that thing. So it means a different thing. In role-playing games, it's obviously what we've been talking about, which is using outside knowledge. Specifically, it says, a term often used to describe players' use of assumed characteristics of the game. In particular, metagaming often refers to having an in-game character act on knowledge that the player has access to, but the character should not. For example, tricking Medusa to stare at a mirror when the character has never heard of Medusa and would not be aware of her petrifying stare.
Right.
Which, that's also a really hard thing to get around. Like, can you pull off the classic, like, your party comes across a bunch of statues in a dungeon, like fucking rock versions of creatures and people? Can they start making knowledge and try to figure out? Because there's a couple creatures in the Forgotten Realms universe, assuming we're talking about Forgotten Realms, that can turn you to stone just by looking at you. There's a couple. There's not even just Medusas. There's basilisks and the little chicken things, I think.
Well, interesting. Well, two things. I want to be, first off, is that, I'm sorry I'm hogging all the points, but I want to make 2 points.
No, go ahead.
One, I think, because the fun part about D&D is that this is just a hodgepodge of all these fun mythological creatures.
It's the rule of cool.
So yes, no, but the thing is, I want them to rack their brains about, what do we know about Medusas? We know that Medusas are the petrifying, we can mirror them. Oh, what do we know about vampires? Oh, wait, we know vampires have a stake in the heart.
So you embrace the cultural mythos that might surround those things.
I think that's part of the fun of the hodgepodge, because this isn't like an entirely, we don't have dragons or mermaids, we have blowfugles, right. We have they have the stock characters that we love from mythology. But also, metagaming, I'm going to sound pedantic because I am, but I'm an English teacher, and you know what metagaming means? Meta means above. So think about it this way. You take yourself outside of the game. You step back and you look at the big picture. And that's kind of the problem, because you're not in that world anymore. You step back and you look at the big picture, because you realize this isn't just me and the rolling die. It's the computer. It's the psyche of the humans controlling these. And that by definition breaks immersion, because you're not immersed inside. You step back and you look at the big picture and the other factors at play. And that kind of is the problem, because you want to have immersion. Otherwise, you realize this is all a facade. you know?
Yeah. To an extent, but to build on that, I think it depends on the group. Some groups who are really role play heavy, they do want to be fully immersed, and they make sure they only know the knowledge that their players' knowledge, and make sure they're very strict on, like, okay, but my character's never heard of this creature, so we don't know. But I think if you're playing a much more lighter, casual group, is like, let's just get together and play a hack and slash basically and just kill monsters and get loot. Then I think what you're talking about with your first point, where it is just fun for your players to be like, oh shit, it's a fucking Medusa situation. Everybody get your mirror shields out or something. Then if everybody's having fun with it, I do think that's perfectly enjoyable. But I think you need to, with all things, know your group, know what your table is, and hopefully everybody's on board with one or the other, or else you can try to toe the line between that. Because I think the problem comes into play when some people are like, oh, well, I know what this is. I know what to do. Everybody follow me. Versus the characters who are like, well, wait, what are you talking about? What are we, my character doesn't know that. So I think that creates a problem. There's a discrepancy in what your players are looking for and how well they want to be immersed in that world.
What's fascinating is that, go on.
I was going to say the meme that I saw this week was when you have an int, a real world int of 10, but you're playing an int 19 wizard.
Yeah,
it's the opposite problem.
The opposite
metagaming is
just tell me, DM. I'm smart. Just tell me.
So what do I know here?
Yeah. A lot more fun to roleplay the dumbasses, I think, in that case than.
To go back to the Medusa example, that's a really good example.
That's why I was.
D&D is a fascinating medium where, like, to put it in movie terms, like I forget which Titans movie it was, the first one or the second one, but the adventurers go into there's a cave and they see there's statues in the cave, and then there's a wide shot of you just see like a scaly tail go across the screen. We as the audience watching that movie are like, oh shit, the adventurers don't know what they're in for.
Yeah.
The adventurers didn't see that tail go by. So they're just sort of like, well, what's happening? But in D&D, you're both. You are both the adventurer in the moment and you're the audience watching the scene going like, oh shit, what are these players in for? So you kind of have to play to both of those things of like, okay, the 5 people walking through this dungeon don't know what's around them. But all of us playing them are like, oh shit, we're in for a Medusa here, because we're seeing the signs.
Yeah, I don't know how to. It's a really tricky thing to balance, I think, and I think it depends on who your players are at the table and what they're looking for. I feel like
honestly, I think I agree with you that I don't think it's that big of a problem.
It might not be that big of a problem for sure.
In terms of, I think the most players do with it. And this is just my personal experience, because it's my gut reaction. This is all my gut reaction is to do with it, is to avoid immunities. That's all that I ever really do with it. I come across undead and I don't cast my charm spells or my psychic spells. Other than that, I don't like try to like, oh no, what is this Minotaur skeleton capable of? It's almost it's almost more interesting, I think, for most players to find out or act like they're finding out what a creature is capable of.
Yeah.
And the only thing that's really interesting to them as a player for metagaming purposes is like, what are they straight up immune to? What should I just not do against this thing?
I think you're right, because it does kind of suck to realize that in the moment, even though it can give the DM a very sad. There was actually a moment that happened, another spoiler for our Rhyme campaign around Grimskala, when you did that shipwreck dungeon, and there were these like icy ghost skeleton things.
Yeah.
And that was from Tome of Beasts.
Tome or Tomb?
Yeah, I always say Tome of Beasts too. I ran Tomb of Annihilation for 2 years, and Edmund threw a flaming sphere at it, and it happens to be those particular ghosts. Their whole backstory was they died from lack of warmth, and now in death they seek out fire. So not only does it not do extra damage to them as he was hoping, they do the opposite. They actually heal that creature. So they happen to be not injured at the time, so that was didn't get that effect. But I did get to satisfyingly like describe the creature, in universe, like it embraces the flame, and he was like, wait, what? This isn't supposed to happen. So that was kind of a cool moment.
That is fun.
Yeah, and then he kind of played with that a little bit.
Yeah.
And I built on that. Where it's like, oh, isn't this creature distracted by that? And I was like, mechanically, no, but yeah, maybe. That kind of makes sense. So I enjoyed them finding out the hard way, even though that comes with the bitter pill of saying, oh, you did kind of waste your thing, though, because you found out the hard way that, you did something that seems like it made sense. And I liked, that was an example of using a creature they'd never met before. He just used the knowledge of like, this is an ice-themed creature. I play a lot of video games. I'm going to use fire on it. And maybe that's as a player. But I think as a general, hey, I know what opposite, elements are opposite to each
Yeah.
other, so I'm gonna use fire on an ice creature. That doesn't seem like metagaming. But he found out the hard way, and thus, didn't get to do basically anything on his turn except for summon that flaming sphere that distracted the skeleton.
I think
I want to switch gears because Stan used something a long time ago that I think is really interesting. I kind of want to talk about it.
Yeah.
The other type of metagaming isn't people who come in having read the book or know the monsters or whatever. The other type of metagaming is I'm not in that room, but I'm hearing the conversation of what's happening in that room.
Mm.
Oh, what Brandon was saying? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Can I act as if I do? We had that with where we were really fucked. When you fucked us with the Stunlock creature, Eric.
I do that.
Half of us didn't know what was going on in that other room, but we could just hear you describing all the horrendous shit that was happening to our teammates.
Which when was
this was the
Dazan, wasn't it?
Dazan, yeah, the Dazan dungeon.
Yeah.
Oh,
2 or 3 of us were down there with that Dazan mass of bodies.
Yeah.
And we're getting utterly fucked by that thing. They were getting stunlocked and dragged in. But the other 2 or 3 of us that weren't there didn't know that.
Yes, I think that's an interesting point where the players do kind of come up with policing themselves, where they'll mention the fact, like, do I even know this is happening? Like, us as players do that a lot, where it's like, do we even know that this is happening, or I'm not aware of that? Usually I think because there's a bit of Schadenfreude at the table where somebody does something foolhardy, it gets them in trouble, and the other players are like, well, I'm not aware of that business. I have definitely noticed that amongst players, and it's pretty funny.
Yeah.
But I as the DM, I think 9 times out of 10 will at least say, like, well, you hear screams down the hall, or something is alerting you to the fact, your friends left and haven't returned, and you've heard some
really
pretty terrible.
Quiet down there.
Yeah.
I was going to ask something, but did Brendan want to go first?
No. You can ask. I'll kind of keep in mind in the back of my head.
Okay. I assert. We're talking about monsters mostly, and abilities and immunities, and I guess players from our DM perspective. I pretty much am of the opinion that the one thing you straight up can't push in the back of your head or try to quell is, and one advantage we still have is, like, sure, they know what a beholder is, they have the beams and stuff. But if you know the map, if you know the dungeon, you ruined it for yourself. You can't.
Players do it.
That's a good point.
No. But they might be familiar. Look, if you have a player that, or they might understand the convention. Because no. First off, I've heard horror stories, and like at that point,
bullshit. I would.
Why would you?
About that.
Why would you play with that person?
Yeah.
I mean, at that point, they need to fix their perspective at that point. But just like, but if you subconsciously, or you've seen this before, or they recognize this. Assuming they aren't just acting in terribly bad faith.
Let me ask this real quick. Has anybody here had a player who has previously played a campaign that they've played? Brant? Yeah. You had a look on your face. I was like, I think.
Yeah. So he had played Tomb of Annihilation. I was running Tomb of Annihilation, and he had situations where he knew the very end of the campaign. He had been through sections of the end of the campaign. He kind of filled in for other people. And so
what do you do with that?
That was exactly the problem, was that he was like, I'm going to let them make the decisions. And more than once, and this is what I was going to tie into, was that the only downside, I have my metagaming problem when it affects other players. When you're encouraging other people to do or not to do something is where I start to say that, like, you know what I mean? It'll just be a real quick.
Don't fuck it up for them.
Like, like a squirt bottle.
and so the downside is that, like, if it happens once, I'll do like a polite warning, right? It'll be something like or I don't even know. It's not I don't do the until like a couple times, right? And then the next time I'm getting slightly more confrontational. And that's the part that I guess I was going to talk about, was that once you've crossed that line of where we're not okay with this anymore, now you have kind of broken the silent code of where we're all kind of in agreement here. I'm going to be more confrontational about the situation, and not rude in front of other people, but I am going to start to put you on the spot. I'm going to put you on the spot. And it's like, why would you do that? Why would your character do that? And it makes me feel like poo toward the end of it, because I'm like, I should handle this differently. But in the heat of the moment, right? You're a DM. You're excited. You're trying to show your players
the
something.
Surprise of what you got planned is all
and he
you
just
got,
stole it from you. And it's like, So the the other part is like outside of it being confrontational, he did really good for the most part, but there was one or two moments that he was starting to pull things out. It wasn't his fault. Like he just knew he did his best, and I was just like, well, you wouldn't really know that, so you guys have to make your decision the best that you can without that.
Do you have a specific anecdote you can share with obviously spoilers for Tomb? Because I'm curious to try to figure out.
I don't have a good one that I could nail down, but it was more than once that it was just enough that I was like, well, I mean, would you know to do that? Is that something that you would be able to decide? And he was like, okay, well, we can just roll for it. And that's usually how the decision was decided, is that it would be rolled for.
But frankly speaking, he was ruining it for one player guaranteed. Himself, no? Did he really
He's okay.
What was
with
the
that.
point?
That's the downside, is he was okay with it the whole time.
So it was fun, like knowing it all.
Yes,
I wouldn't really want to play
being
the campaign I've already done before.
omnipotent about the situation.
I mean, you can play with your friends and with people.
I have a good one. I have a good one. There's a moment where you're in the control room that turns the gears of hate. And there's a red button, a blue button, and a lever or two. I can't remember the details. I purposely switched the two buttons. To the point
that's clever.
To the point that I screwed myself up so bad.
Oh no!
It took me like 15 more minutes to figure out that was the and so like I thought I gave it away because
I wrote myself shoddy instructions.
Yeah. So, but that was the best example I can give, is where I purposely switched them because I knew that he knew stuff about it. Yeah. So I was like, well, let's see if he exercises it. And he did. And I got to do the stuff that I wanted to. Yeah. But it wasn't him purposely being mischievous or malicious. It was just he was trying to make the game move forward where everybody else didn't want to touch anything.
Okay.
The two things I can think of from Tomb that just immediately pop in my head are the countdown trap. If somebody just said like, oh, we just let it count down, and it'll be fine. It's counting down to opening the door.
That did happen too.
I would have been like, fuck you.
Yeah, because it was such a great moment too. It was like,
yeah. And the second one is if someone had told Mannix not to stick his hand in that mouth, I would have been a little upset, because that was a lot of fun. Fucking just having my hand chopped out by a sphere of annihilation.
That is a particular dungeon that would be I don't think I would let somebody play that already experienced that, because there's so much of that is the death trap dungeon. Like, how do you?
It's like it's yes or no questions. Like, do this or don't do this right now.
Right.
And if you know the answer, then
that burden of knowledge. It would be impossible to get away from unless you were just playing like an NPC who just like tags along and doesn't have any like volition through that whole dungeon. In which case, that doesn't seem like a fun game to play.
But you were talking about how that ruins it for that player, right? That was the point you were making.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't it? I mean, then again, you could argue that, like, well, you watch a movie more than once, even if it's a mystery. But, like, I don't think it's the same for a game.
I don't think it's the same either. Yeah. I feel like as a player, I would almost, like, have an expectation that the DM's going to, like, change things up a little bit. So you're going to, like, experience this, like a new game plus playthrough. Like, maybe there's going to be some harder monsters, or there's going to be some different puzzles or something.
And you could play a different character, I suppose. But even then, it's just, like, you did it already.
Yeah.
It felt like a little bit of being excited. This wasn't a conversation we ever had. This is an observation that might not be fair for me to speak for, but it seemed like there was some excitement that we experience as DMs for them to see what's next. That he got to experience too. There was a little bit of that.
I've seen that before. With like you're walking into like, I don't know what a good example is, like an escape room. Like you're walking in for like there's like 6 of you. One of you is going like, you guys, you're gonna love this. This is gonna be so cool.
Yeah.
You're just like, all right, man, let's just all experience the thing.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure
that's a good point. That's an entirely different category of metagaming. Is somebody who knows information about the campaign or the actual maps that we're playing on or whatever else. That is probably a deal breaker, honestly. Like, I don't know how somebody would
start as a DM to play sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's harder and easier. And that's what, your patron game, every single one of us at that table, we're all DMs.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it's a different, we play a little differently than I think other people do.
Yeah.
And we're intentionally trying not to metagame, as we're doing it. That's something that's in a lot of the forefront of our mind of, well, if I was a DM, I would be doing this. No, I can't think like that. I've got to, and that's how you start getting people with, characters with like death wishes and stuff like that. I've got to play this
suboptimal for the win.
Yeah,
I
I've got to
appreciate
role play it.
characters who are role playing. They know to the detriment of themselves and to the story, but they're role playing, so they're like, I'm just gonna do the thing because that's what my character would do.
Yeah.
There is something you can do though. I'll spare the whole referencing anecdote, but basically, there's a thing. It's a literary term which I forgot, but basically, you can have a part that the audience playing off of meta knowledge. Like the audience knows this is going to happen, but then it goes wrong a different way. So like, oh, what if Oral, you got her down to her last form, but her last form's different.
Right.
Or or her last form is a fire elemental or something, So like, I'll spare the long version, but basically just you could subvert their meta knowledge and just do the opposite or stop it,
Sure.
And that is, then again, that's like an arms race of meta knowledge.
It can be. It can be. Yeah, I think using different worlds can help sometimes. I know.
Yes.
The Patron D&D game right now is in Kobold Press's world of Midgard, which it's a fantasy world. Obviously a high fantasy world, but it's not the Forgotten Realms. So it's got different things at play, different factions, different certain races and monsters act differently there. So that part helps solve a lot of the problem, because even experienced, DMs, as players who have played a lot in some universes, might not be as familiar with this one. So like, okay, now I feel like, I don't have that information necessarily that I would normally come into play with, and that can help because even though you can be really good about not using that meta knowledge, I think it helps ease that burden if you don't have to push that back, and instead you can experience new creatures and new monsters and new factions and new countries and new everything, and then not have to worry about that predisposed knowledge that you have. It's like, oh, I don't know how vampirism works in this universe versus this universe, for example, or how things are how clockwork or what are they called, Gearforged creatures work in this, what's the context there versus how Warforged work in Eberron. So I think being able to use different worlds, fantasy worlds, but even just different monsters in different contexts. So we talked about reskinning them. All of that can help ease that burden, even though I really appreciate players who come to the table and say, hey, I'm going to try to not use my meta knowledge. But even as Lucas was saying, like, sometimes that's not necessarily a bad thing. You can have fun with that knowledge as well. You can all strap in and be like, all right, we know what we're up against. Let's just have fun with it, and that can be totally cool if everybody's on board with that system, or hopefully everybody's on board with the polar opposite of that. Is we want to be fully immersed in this. I only know exactly what my character would know, and that's how I want to roll with.
Yeah, I get a lot of mileage out of just because for fun, I just go and find like monster art because I like monster art. I think just
you do a lot of custom creatures.
Yeah, is cool. So there's a lot of that of like, okay, well, this is just an orc berserker, but now it's a plant creature with like spiky arms. Like that's because I found that art and I really like that art, and I want to make a plant creature with spiky arms.
Yeah,
and he's got the stat block of an orc berserker, but
which is a great point. You don't have to come up with a creature from scratch. Like there's, especially this late in 5e's life cycle, holy crap, there are so many stat blocks for so many kinds of mechanical things, and you can attach that to any goddamn creature you want, and then you've got a new creature. Like just take any existing stat block and change its type. You can change some resistances and obviously just the look of it.
Right.
And then you've got a whole new creature, and at some point somebody may, if they're really into the thing, may go, oh wait, this is a whatever. You just made a.
That's actually, I'd actually be all right with that.
Yeah.
Like halfway through the fight, they realize what.
Yeah, wait a minute, this is just a beholder firing eye rays or something. This isn't somebody with a magic laser pistol shooting things all the time. Like, what are you doing? It's like, yeah.
You got me.
You got me. Now death laser. Yep. All right,
I will say, back to the DM curse point. Eric, I mean, when you were picking Rhyme, I remember watching your video about picking the next DM thing. I remember there were like 2 of the like 5 or 6 choices where I was literally like, shit, if he picks that one, I'm gonna have to like try to forget that I looked.
Oh, because you've looked at
I was looking through books for Storm Kings, I think.
Yeah,
like, trying to pick which one we're gonna.
Which
do.
is probably the problem with I got like a lot of.
I've looked at all the Curse of Strahd maps. I've looked at
I've got a lot of DMs as play that kind of thing, like where it's like, oh, they just have that like that's why you need to pick those kind of adventures, because that would be a really hard thing to get away from is how do we how do I run like a Curse of Strahd or Tyranny of Dragons when that's been out so long, and chances are somebody's at least seen some map or has some inkling about the campaign, where it can get a little trickier versus running the new hotness that maybe people aren't as familiar with. That does get tricky for sure. That's the burden of knowledge.
Ran into that at Gen Con. At Gen Con, we got a bunch of us. There were a bunch of us that had been played in the '80s and played Dragonlance, and we got to sit in on a Dragonlance game. And we're sitting with three other players that didn't know anything about Kryn at all.
Okay.
And we're all going like, okay, your character would know this. We have to forget that we know this part over here. And it was just splitting of, trying to explain culture to them, but at the same time, like, I know exactly what that is, and we're screwed.
I can't say that because my character doesn't know that.
Yeah, that could be. It's the burden of knowledge. Yeah, it can be very frustrating if you know that information. You have to hold your tongue. It's like, this sucks.
Or you just play Kender like I do, and you run in headfirst on anything without fear. So it solved the problem. It's like I can't be afraid of anything. I just run in. So
play a character who just wouldn't know better.
Yep,
that's right.
All right, closing thoughts on metagaming. We're gonna go in reverse order. So let's start with Chris.
I think like 80-85% of the time, don't worry about it, is kind of where I land. Like it's not going to hurt things. The 15% of the time is probably people who are actively being malicious, which thankfully, Eric, you and I don't really have to worry about.
Yeah.
And I don't. Yeah, and I feel like if you're in that realm, you got a whole other set of problems.
Yep. Lucas, final thoughts on metagaming.
As long as you don't have people acting in bad faith, as long as they're not acting in bad faith, trying to cheat the system, people want to feel rewarded for drawing on their knowledge. Like, I know how vampires work, or I know what the dragons are like. So people want to just allow them to have fun in that way, as long as they're not ruining it for themselves as well as everyone else.
Yeah, that's good general advice for D&D. Allow people to have fun. Just don't let it ruin for everybody else.
Or themselves, because they're a person too.
Yeah, as long as your fun isn't hurting you or anybody else, have fun.
Yep. Stan, final thoughts on metagaming.
Kind of the modern culture 5e goes back to almost setting up session 0 of what are our expectations. And, this is the way I run my campaign. This is what I expect from you as players. And then this is what I'm going to provide for you of, this level of meta knowledge, and if you set that expectation of, hey, we're a beer and pretzels game, I really don't care that much about metagaming, or we're a hardcore role-playing group, metagaming, might be the cardinal sin. So, set those boundaries early, talk to your players, and life might be a little bit easier for you.
Also an evergreen advice too. Session 0, know the expectations. Brandon, final closing thoughts on metagaming.
I don't think I have too much to add, but basically if you run into the situation, consider having your player roll so that you can stick them to the decision of the roll so that it can help them exercise new skills, role playing and stuff like that.
Very much, yep. Yeah, I would say I think it's a bigger it's not as big a problem as the internet would let you to believe. Basically, I've seen a lot of complaints online about worries about metagaming and people using that knowledge, and I think what has been brought up a lot here is that it's probably not that big of a deal, especially if everybody's having fun with it, with that information. But of course, always know the context of your group and what people are wanting out of it, and if they are that wanting that very hardcore immersive experience, then any kind of outsider knowledge could be a problem. But maybe your group will police itself. Maybe if they already have, if they are hardcore into that, then chances are somebody will at the table bring it up and say, hey, this, well, my character doesn't know that. Does your character know that? And, assuming everybody stays respectful about it, then hopefully we can deal with those situations as it arises. That being said, Don't want to turn it into an arms race, but I think, there are some solutions you can use. You can reskin your monsters. You can add different variants. You can use new monster types, set in new campaign worlds, do unexpected things. Obviously, as a new DM, I wouldn't necessarily do that. I think there's a lot of good pre-published stuff out there that you should draw from. But as you get more experience under your belt and you're playing with presumably players that are also gaining more experience, then it can help to kind of subvert those expectations in a lot of really fun ways. And I think your players will enjoy that too, if done correctly. Not every monster should be a different variant or anything. Also, don't go overboard with it necessarily. Because I think there is, especially if it's in the context of that same campaign, if they've fought that creature before, if they gain that knowledge, or if they've just learned that, they went to the in-universe library or something, learned about that creature, then they should be able to use that information to their advantage. But don't let it be an arms race. That being said, I would really not want to play with somebody who had intimate knowledge with a campaign already, with actual maps and dungeon information, because that would seem like a really hard thing to decouple from. And I guess you could leave it up to a roll or something, but that seems like it would just irk me the wrong way in so many ways if you already have that information available. But I think everything else we can kind of deal with as come. But maybe we don't. Maybe we just have fun with it and we just play D&D and hang out and you say, hey, we've got petrified statues around here. Everybody get your fucking mirror shields out. Let's go.
And sometimes albino dragons exist.
That is true.
I want to add one little anecdote because you reminded me of something.
Oh, here we go. We got the anecdote.
I've learned not to do this now, but previously, in order to watch the Discord and Roll20 and the chat, I had YouTube up. And I would occasionally click over to YouTube and I would accidentally see your map. And I'd be like, oh, fuck. And because I would literally, it's like, okay, there were times where we're literally right behind a door.
This is a unique situation because I live stream my games. So clearly somebody can literally type a URL into a website and see what I'm seeing.
The whole map, yes. So
talk about cheat code.
What I've learned to do is pop out the chat, keep the YouTube page in this window, like my main window, and just in the background, so I can see the chat. I don't have to go to the YouTube page.
If you really want to solve that, I don't think it's an issue because obviously it's an accident and it's a fringe case. But on Twitch, they call that stream sniping. When a gamer is streaming a game,
you play competitively with somebody and you're watching their stream.
We all know. Sometimes they put a delay, like a minute or 30-second delay, so that they can't see.
Okay.
That is an option. Yeah, we all know Chris is just he's sniping. Yeah, he's like, oh, this is a really hard fight. I'm just gonna pull up what's the shit.
Oh shit! Look at all those tokens in the GM layer. God damn!
I ain't going that way. Yeah, that is a unique fringe case for my situation where you can literally turn around and you can see the screen on there. But thankfully, most of my players are cool and would never do that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you to Brandon, Stan, Lucas, and a special guest, Chris, for joining me for this month's DM Roundtable. And thank you to all the patrons at patreon.com/RogueWatson. Shoutouts to Platinum patrons, Joe, Will, Thomas, Stan, William, Brandon, Genocider, David, Eclectic, Roleplay Roll, Christopher, Brian, William, David, Corey, Goa1337, Kyle, Matthew, Big Nut, Greenlee, John, Infernus, Chris, and Chris. And gold patrons, RPG, Papercrafts, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcus, Dead Lizard, Lion, Sam, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Nathan, Fastlega, Tortoise, Scott, Stephanie, Refus, and Carolyn. Thank you all very much for your support. Hope to see you all again for the next DM Roundtable discussion.
Thanks for the opportunity.